Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I am delighted for the first time in a wee while, Laura, to be joined by Laura Bradburn. How are you?
I'm fine. I was supposed to be joining you a couple of weeks ago, and I think you had a bit of a tough time getting into the studio, so it's good to see you managed to make it.
I know, I prefer to say I had a tough time getting out of Fife. People have got this preconception about Fife and Fifers and the fact that we're backwards and we don't have things like telephones and internet and electricity. But it was basically roadworks preventing me from getting in 2 weekends running. So, thankfully you were able to pick that up and run with it. Laura, we're on a rich vein of form. There's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of weeks in relation to our form in Europe, domestically. I watched with interest, obviously, we had James McKenzie at the pre-match presser for the Livingston game. And we've spoke about this before, and I'm not criticising anybody, but a lot of the questions are pretty similar, aren't they? They're a bit samey going into this game. How do you adapt to playing on a plastic pitch? What's the difference between Champions League and domestic? How do you keep your players motivated after the big game during the week and all this kind of stuff? But Ange just sticks to his guns. He answers it the same way every single time. He will be approaching this game in the same way, with the same level of respect as he approaches all the games. What do you make of the aftermath of the European exit? And if you look back on the campaign, Laura, what do you make of the debut campaign under Ange?
Well, it's interesting because I've obviously picked it apart on the Friday Bulletin, but I'm usually the one asking the questions, and I've had a chance over the past couple of weeks to think about my opinion of the European exploits, and I'm conflicted, I have to say, because there's utter frustration mixed with a bit of pride as well, because I think, as Brian said on the bulletin yesterday, a lot of us have never been prouder of a Celtic team coming away with a defeat than we were that first game against Real Madrid, the way that we played. And I think what we've proved, unlike a lot of clubs in the group stages, is that we are there to try and compete. We're not there to batten down the hatches and try and avoid embarrassment. We're there to try and make these big clubs think again when they come and play against us. But what's clear is, for all that we love certain members of this team and certain members of this squad, as much as anybody, we're still a fair way short of the level of quality that you need at that level. And I'm not even talking about chance creation. We all know the stat about something like 68 chances created and 3 goals scored. But we just lack that lethal touch, that killer instinct that some of these bigger teams have. You look at the game against Leipzig, they were, for major portions of the match at Celtic Park, we were the team on top, but we get picked off a few times and that was it. And they had the quality to do that. We just fall short in that sense, but listen, if there's one man who's going to learn from it, it's Ange Postecoglou, and I think whether he wants to share it, everybody talks about how forthright he is in what he says, and he is, but I think he keeps his cards close to his chest as well. He will have ideas about certain members of the squad, he'll have ideas about who cuts the mustard and who doesn't, and he'll be already planning. We saw how much he was planning towards the end of last season when we were coasting towards the end of to the title. How much he was planning for next season. He'll be doing that again now already, I would say.
Yeah, when I look at the Ange Postecoglou era as it stands at the moment, that first clutch of players that we bring in the first transfer window, some of them last minute, Carter Vickers last minute on loan, but we did bring in the quality of Juranovic, the quality of Kyogo, and of Giakoumakis. It took him a wee while to settle and get fit and come into the team. Then you had that spectacular January transfer window. Laura, like you say, he was analysing the failures and the faults and the frailties of the squad, and then we've gone in, and every player other than Idiguchi, who hasn't had the run of games that he and everybody else would have liked him to have, everybody else has been a success. Then this transfer window, you look at the way that we've strengthened it. Some of them, things like bringing in Bernabe and Siegrist, you think, well, that really strengthens those two positions. And you look at Taylor, who, by the way, his performances were on an upward trajectory anyway, Laura. I'm not saying it was because Bernabé's came in, but it must help when there's somebody breathing down your neck constantly that your performance level needs to meet a certain standard. Then we make the 2 permanent signings of Jota and Carter Vickers, and we bring in the likes of Haksabanovic, Abligor, who we've not really seen a great deal of yet. And then you think to yourself, we're going to go again, 4th transfer window in January. We're going to improve once again. So people that have been mainly in the mainstream press just, thrown us into this wee basket with the rest of the Scottish football European performances, Laura, and 1 or 2 have come out and spoke out against it, and rightly so. They're not really looking at the performances that Celtic have put in. They're not looking at the progress that this team has made. The belief, not only in the team, but in the fans. I mean, we were sitting, Kevin McCluskey and I, sitting at the half-time bulletin against Real Madrid thinking we're going to win this. Now, when was the last time you had such a belief in a Celtic side to believe that you were actually going to beat Real Madrid? Didn't work out. But like you say, I don't like getting beat, but you were proud of the team's performance that night. And I think that when we look at that squad, there are going to be other players who come in who become very, very important parts of Ange's team. But I also think that there's a handful of players in that team, Laura, who will improve to the required standard. Now, I'm not going to say that individually they will be the elite player that a Real Madrid would be chasing or Barcelona would be chasing. But you look at some of the performances we've had already, there has been hints that players like Hatate and O'Reilly, for example, have improved already, but there's still room for improvement, and they seem to have the ability to do it. Jota is another one. I think the performances of Jens and Carter Vickers in Europe this season have been particularly impressive at the back. I know that we've leaked a few goals, but I'm looking at the team we've got there now and think we're not a million miles away. And then if you supplement that with a few signings in January and again in the pre-season, next season is when I think we start judging our Champions League pedigree. And I know that Ange is at pains to say that. We've not been playing at this level for 5 years. A lot of those players didn't have the experience. Those 5 or 6 games this year, Laura, will be huge in the progress and the development of all those players that we've been talking about. I mean, next season, I think we'll see a different beast.
Yeah, I mean, in very much the opposite sense, the phrase "you can only beat what's put in front of you" is often used when the opposition isn't up to a certain standard. And to an extent, this Celtic team couldn't beat what was put in front of them because they didn't know what they were going to face, really. They didn't know the standard of what they were going to face. Mm-hmm. How many of that squad have ever played in the Champions League before? I think maybe only Callum McGregor and James Forrest of the remaining first
Forrest,
team.
McGregor and Hart. So when you're looking on the outfield players, Laura, there's been a few games where none of the team, other than Joe Hart, have played in the Champions League prior to this season. And we've got to take that into account, in terms of the experience at this level. Some of the players I think have surprised a lot of us. I always heard that Greg Taylor could never be deemed a European quality player, but his performances this season have been excellent.
Another one for me is Rio Hatate. I mean, listen, there's plenty you could criticise about his game, not least against Shakhtar. I think he was too wasteful with possession against Shakhtar. But iron out those creases, get rid of those wee inconsistencies in his game, and he has the capability to be at the very top level. You said before we might not be chasing the same players as a Barcelona or a Real Madrid, but what we've helped do is populate some teams at that level with the players that we've had. You only need to look at Moussa Dembele, one of the top strikers in Europe at the moment for Lyon. Virgil van Dijk, we don't need to familiarise ourselves with what he's done. Kieran Tierney is battling it out for a place in the team at the top or near the top of the Premier League. What we need to do is make sure that those players hopefully reach a level similar to that a little bit before they leave us, and that they don't have to rely on reaching that top level when they get to another club. Because what we are able to do as a club is identify talent. What we maybe need to improve on doing is making that talent reach their full potential before they get identified by these bigger clubs.
It's a great point, Laura, because we are very good at identifying talent, and I know we've criticised the recruitment policy over the last period. However, we did a show, Colin Watt and I did a show where we were looking at the 9-in-a-row era and looking at, the team that you could assemble from that group of players. Now, it would be unrealistic to suggest you're going to keep Victor Wanyama for 10 years so that, he can play in the same team as Kyogo or Jota. But your point stands that there will come a point, and it does happen in football, and it's happened in the not too distant past with Ajax, for example, where a group of players are all there at the same time. And yeah, they may go on, and in Ajax's case, they did go on to get sold for big money. But for that 1 or 2 seasons, there is a collection of players who all come together at the same time. And when that happens, then, like you say, imagine having a team with the players that you've mentioned together. It's a frightening prospect. And I use Ajax as an example because I think that what they have done in the past, and others, is they have produced a phenomenal amount of talent from their academy. And I think that Ange will also have that one eye on that. That's a massive part of it. With every passing week and every passing compilation video of Ben Doak ripping it up for Liverpool and making an incredible progression, the more you think to yourself, how many of these young guys have we let go in the last 5 or 6 years will go on to be top players? That's a wee bit more difficult, I think, because there's a real carrot now, Laura, that I don't think it really existed at that level. The players that haven't broken through yet, getting taken to Germany and going down south. It was mainly once they'd established themselves with Celtic. But what we've now seen in the last, as I say, 5-6 years, is players before they even get a chance to pull on the hoops for the first team. I know Ben Doak got a couple of subby appearances. They're getting pulled away elsewhere because the carrot is just too big. The financial, and it's just too big, and we can't compete with that. That's a concern, and I'm not sure how much Ange can do with that. I think the next one we really need to keep an eye on is Rocco Vata in that respect. We need to get him in and around the first team, and we need to show him that there's a pathway to our first team as well.
Well, I think that's the major issue. I don't even think it's a money issue in a lot of senses. Now, I'm not naive. Ben Doak will have, I was about to say tripled or quadrupled his wage. It will be more than that to play for the Liverpool under-18s. It'll be on something along the lines of £20,000 a week if they think he's anywhere near good enough. But I think what's more frustrating for these young guys is so many of them. I mean, take Mikey Johnson as an example. I mean, he's not brilliant. I've been openly critical of the guy, and I don't think he is proper Celtic quality. But when he came in at first, you could have argued that he was. Mm-hmm. And maybe if he'd been given consistent chances to impress in the first team more often than just coming in for a few games, out for a few games, injuries aside, maybe he would have gone on to become a Celtic regular and then got a bigger move off the back of that. So many of these players are looking and thinking, regardless of money, I don't see the path to the first team. If I don't watch myself, I'll be playing for, with no disrespect, a Ross County or a Motherwell or somebody like that, where it then becomes much more difficult for them to get noticed by these big clubs. While they're still a youth prospect at Celtic, they've got a value that these big clubs look at. The minute even they become a first team player at any other Scottish club, the big clubs aren't looking at those teams. So that's where they're thinking, well, I'd rather play for Liverpool under-18s than play for St Mirren first team because the value's better.
That's an excellent point. I mean, even as a young prospect at Celtic, in many ways your value's higher at that point, because if you then take that step down, it's almost as if, you've not made it and you've had to take a step down. I mean, I think one of the classic examples, one of the graduates, Calvin Miller, remember he won that incredible award, one of the top players in Europe at a certain age, and then you look at where his career's gone. And it's a shame when you see players that don't really live up to their potential. You mentioned Mikey Johnson, just an interesting one. We've got a few players out on loan at the moment. We're going to get to the team lines, by the way, in a second. Laura and I haven't spoken for a while, you might have guessed. Of the players that are out on loan, Laura, do you still hold a torch for anybody coming back and making a success of their Celtic career?
I mean, I think unfortunately the way loan markets work nowadays, that just isn't how it works. Unless you're a young player, like who's still waiting for that chance to break into the first team, the purpose of a loan being to go out and get more first team experience, the way Callum McGregor did it at Notts County, the way that I think Ryan Christie did before he came into the Celtic team as well. But unfortunately, if you flip it and you've had the first team opportunity and then you go out on loan, I think that points towards that you're going to be leaving the club. And I think for any of those players who've had previous experience with the first team who are now out on loan, I think it's them putting themselves in the shop window for a permanent move, either to the club that they're at or to somebody else in that league or somebody else watching that league.
Yeah, no, but when you see a player like Mikey Johnson going out and performing well elsewhere, you're delighted for him, and you know that it may actually lead to him leaving the club. But these players at that age need football in their legs. They can't stagnate. I mean, there's a kind of belief in terms of youth development that at the age of 21, and a lot of the big clubs that are good at bringing graduates through and giving them first team games, they want 100 games by the time you're 21, Laura. Now, Callum McGregor didn't play for Celtic until he was 21. So it's one of these things where you've got to try and get the players into the first team squads at 17 and 18 and then build up their appearances, their experience. By the time they're 21, they're knocking on the international door, and that's how we should be progressing our young talents. That may be a wee bit more medium term for Ange Postecoglou, who came in, who had to sort out a squad that was fragmented. He did that. We won the league, we won the double, and we're disappointed to be getting beat from the likes of Real Madrid this season. I think that speaks absolute volumes. We're going to bring in some comments from our regulars, but before we do that, let's have a look at the team. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have already seen the team lines. We'll start off with Celtic. Here we go. Joe Hart in goals. Laura, we've got Tony Ralston coming back in at right back with Greg Taylor, probably the most improved player under Ange Postecoglou at left back. Carter Vickers and Yents, centre half partnership. And I think they're building up a really good relationship in the centre of defence. In the midfield, we've got Moy, O'Reilly, Hatate, and up top, Forrest, Haksabanovic, Kyogo. Although Kyogo's sitting there as number 11, I would expect him to be going through the middle with Haksabanovic out left, Forrest out right. And on the bench, we've got Siegrist, Giakoumakis, Abada, Turnbull, Jota, Bernabe, Abligor, Maeda and Juranovic. Very, very strong bench again. Laura, are you surprised? I think looking at social media, people are maybe surprised Giakoumakis has dropped to the bench. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed with that because I think he's a player who, for me anyway, has more of an impact more consistently than Kyogo across the board. I mean, Kyogo, don't get me wrong, can pop up at any time and score a goal, so you would never be disappointed to see him selected. But when you're expecting a team to camp in and park the bus and make life difficult for you in that sense, I think my preferred choice would have been Giakoumakis, especially because of his form in recent weeks as well, and that goal during the week. So it's disappointing for me, but again, I can't be too disappointed that Kyogo's ever in the team because I think he's always likely to bag a goal at some point. The other one that I'm really encouraged to see is James Forrest. There was plenty of people shouting for him to potentially get a look in during the week, and some questioning why he doesn't. But one thing's for sure, for all the things that we've said about him maybe needing a bit part role and being a little bit, past it because of past injuries, he's certainly hit a vein of form, and this is a situation where you have to use him because when his confidence is up, he's as dangerous a player as we've got in the squad. And just lastly, before I go back to you, the other one I'm looking at there is that concerns me a little bit is Aaron Moy. Now, I know I've praised Aaron Moy for recent performances. I think he's had a very good impact. I think he's a calm influence on the midfield. But what I do worry about with him is that he does slow our play down an awful lot. We always talk about Ange saying never stop, creating a game with high intensity and urgency. And sometimes you feel a little bit like Aaron Moy, just things take a little bit longer to get going when he's on the ball, I think. So it might be a positive for today, just when we need a little bit of a break from trying to break down that Livingston defence. And maybe that's the way Ange is thinking. But that's my only concern from the 11 that I can see in front of me.
Yeah, we'll work through the areas of the pack then. I mean, Kyogo in, Giakoumakis benched was the biggie, I think. But again, like you say there, James Forrest has divided opinion for quite a few seasons, I think. He's starting today and he is going to try and get his 100th assist in a Celtic jersey to go along with his 101 goals, I think it is now, and 450 odd appearances for the club as well. Haksabanovic, he was in the pre-match press conference with James McKenzie earlier in the week as well. Laura, he's a guy that seems very focused, and he's obviously, he's a player who's had a few disappointments in his career so far. Burst onto the scene as a teenager. He had that West Ham move that didn't quite work out. He doesn't look on that, with too much disappointment. He goes on about what he took from that, the experience that he gained from being at a club like West Ham in that league. And I think we've seen enough to suggest that he could well, once he's firing on all cylinders, he could well become a top player for Celtic. A couple of the press conferences that he's given, a couple of the answers rather in the press conference went along the lines of, I'm not my best yet, I'm not fit enough yet, I'm still fitting into this team. He's still regarding himself as a new recruit. Laura, how impressed have you been with Haksabanovic, and do you think we're going to get a bit more between now and the end of the season from him?
I think he's honest, sometimes maybe a bit too honest, in saying that he's not fit and things like that, and that we haven't seen the best of him. I do think that's the case, and again, from a backroom staff kind of place, we saw that with Giakoumakis last season. I'd be concerned not from the players' point of view themselves, because they're following all the guidance that they have to follow. How are we sitting here with Haksabanovic in near the end of October, nearly November, not fully match fit? That's not his fault, I don't think. That's something to do with the way in which the club is operating in the background, and so that's something that I still feel needs investigated. But looking at him as a player, I think he offers us something that no other player in the squad offers us. He's got a bit of pace about him, and for a wide player, he's quite powerful. You look at the Jotas and James Forrests of this world, who are a bit smaller and are designed almost to weave in and out of players. Haksabanovic doesn't strike you as that archetypal wide player, but I think that brings us a lot to the team that we wouldn't get from another player. And he can drive at defences, he can be a threat from set pieces, he can do a lot of things that usually a player in his position doesn't offer. And so I think hopefully if we get a fully fit Haksabanovic, we can take full advantage of that. And it means if in a certain game a Jota or a Forrest or an Abada isn't working, you've got another option there that you can bring on to change things up slightly.
Yeah, I mean, because with the four players we've been talking about here, imagine they were all hitting top form. Haksabanovic, Forrest, Abada and Jota all at one time. That's a frightening prospect. It doesn't always happen like that. Players go through waves of good performances and not so good, but for it all to come together at one time would give the manager a real headache, but a good one, a good dilemma to have. Now, sometimes as football fans, Laura, we look at this game, we look at maybe Hearts at Tynecastle, you think, right, you want to start with your big physical players, because that's what you need against a team like Livingston on the plastic pitch. And I think there's a wee element of that with regards to Tony Ralston. He's that type of player. Domestically, he'll, roll the sleeves up and get stuck in. But at the same time, Ange hasn't gone for that kind of option up top, because he's playing Kyogo, who's got far more flair than Giakoumakis, who's a big, strong individual who wins you a lot of free kicks in Europe, a lot more free kicks in Europe than he does domestically. I don't think going by his press conference the other day that he buys into all that, Laura. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, he's brought Ralston in today, but I just think he's all about playing his game regardless of the opposition. So we've gone into today's game and it won't really concern him that Kyogo isn't the most physical of players. Do you think that's something that we can play our way through? Because, I mean, the talent is there for all to see on the park. I mean, with regards to Moy, you were talking about concerns with Moy. Would you bring in Turnbull, more of a football player with a wee bit more finesse for a game like today? Or do you think, Moy, with the strength and the qualities he's got, he plays with a wee bit more aggression? Do you think that's part of the game plan for Ange today? Or, what he was saying at the press conference was that he doesn't think about that. He plays the players that he thinks can win you a game. It's not about physicality.
I can see the logic behind that. I mean, if your game's good enough, you're going to win. A Livingston being picked apart by a prime Bayern Munich aren't going to manage to stop them if Bayern Munich are good enough. And so, if we want to strive for that level in Europe, then a Livingston team that chooses to park the bus shouldn't be able to cope with us, whatever we do. But just based on previous experiences, they have managed to stifle us, and that was where the concern was coming from. Having said that, if Ange wants to stick to his game, if the players are all on form, the Livingston team can be as physical as they want. We will still be able to pass the ball around them and find space, hopefully, and that's where Kyogo really comes into his own. With regard to Moy, I don't know that Turnbull would be the particular option. You might, whether Moy's the one playing further forward or whether it's O'Reilly, because I know O'Reilly's taking the more defensive role since McGregor's get injured. I wondered whether putting O'Reilly and Hatate in the slightly more attacking role and having Abelgard play in the defensive role. Again, because like Haksabanovic, he, from what I've seen anyway, has excellent ball control, good passing ability, but he's also got a bit of physicality in the midfield that if you're expecting that kind of response from Livingston, he might be better able to deal with. So I guess it highlights a kind of little bit of lack of strength in the squad, the fact that McGregor has gone injured, and although it would be hard to name a player who would bring what McGregor brings to the team throughout the whole club, the fact that the step off in quality from him being injured is so great is a little bit concerning. But yeah, for me, I might have selected Abelgard instead of Moy, but people would be right to say in the comments I've not seen enough of him to justify that.
The game's got to come though, Laura, where that choice is made. He's been brought in for that very reason. He needs to play, and we've not seen him starting a game yet, have we? Big Ollie. And of course, when you're looking at that area of the park where Turnbull and Abelgard in there, what we don't have McCarthy or Idiguchi, both fit. Both out of the starting lineup and out of the squad. So I do look ahead to the January transfer window, and I wonder if indeed they're two players that their futures may be elsewhere. We will have a look at Livingston team as well, see who we're facing today. We've got Hamilton, Devlin. Devlin's a decent player actually. Sean Kelly, Obilayi, Fitzwater, Longridge, Penrice, Pittman, Holt, Kelly, and Newbley. Newbley obviously is a bit like yourself and me, Laura. He's had a wee bit of stick on social media over the last couple of weeks, but he does start today. And again, you know what you're getting from a Martindale team. Interestingly enough, though, he's had Lee Griffiths in training with him over the last few weeks. What do you make of that? Do you think he's got a future there at the Tony Macaroni?
I think Lee Griffiths might have more of a future going to eating Tony Macaronis than he does playing football at the arena, but the less said about that, the better.
Laura Bradburn, that was a proper dig. Not even an indirect free kick. That was a dig.
I think I might be getting sent off for a professional foul for that one. But
that was hasty. That was hasty. We wish Lee Griffiths all the best. I hope he can get a contract. I hope he can start playing and scoring goals again and doing what he is good at. We know that he's been out the game for a while. He's obviously not been signed up yet. We've looked at the squad and some of the recent performances, the horror show that doesn't seem to leave us, and a lot of people go back to this when they say, well, Moy, O'Reilly and Hatate can't play together, is the game in Paisley against St Mirren where they beat us and we wore that silver kit. Now, I seen during the week there that there is rumours that we're going to be releasing a fourth kit, Laura. Now, even if it is that yellow one that's been rumoured, which is an absolute cracker, we don't need four kits. That is an absolute cash-in. Celtic Football Club in one season doesn't need four kits. Well,
I mean, it's all right for me sitting here saying I would buy it if I wanted to as an adult with an expendable income to do what I want with my money. But that's not who you're targeting kits at for the majority. You know that if kits get released, kids will be begging their parents from them. It's the run-up to Christmas on a year where we don't need to talk anymore about how many people are struggling to pay their bills, never mind to buy another shirt. Celtic know exactly what they're doing. A fourth kit is not only unnecessary, but in the current circumstances, it actually leaves quite a bad taste in the mouth, considering the history of the club and what they're supposed to be about. I would much rather see them donate shirts to teams, or do something of that ilk, rather than try and pull more cash out of people who were already going to spend their money in the club shop for Christmas. You all know the stuff that you can fill your kids' bedrooms with. You don't need a £60 top to do the same thing again that will probably get worn twice or something like that, considering we've already got 3.
No, this is my big concern. I know that it seems to be here to stay with regards to third kits, is that, we just need to be cuter and in the design process, and we don't need a third kit, never mind a fourth kit, Laura. So although that's not been confirmed by Adidas or by Celtic, there are rumours that it is happening around about Christmas time, and it seems like a blatant cash in. And you know how much I love jerseys.
Bernadette, can I just bring that up? Says they can't even mark it as a European kit. Disgraceful bringing out a fourth kit. That's the thing. We're now in a situation where we'll have more kits than competitions that we're playing in. How? I
know.
How are you supposed to justify that?
I know, it is poor, and we'll actually comment a wee bit more on that if indeed it is announced, Laura, because we do have a few football jersey aficionados in the Acsom team, but I appreciate that we've kicked off, I think, so we're maybe even missing the kick-off. Come back to us at half-time and we'll see how we're doing in Livingston. It's an absolute pleasure as always. Thank you, Laura Bradburn, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Thank you.